All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Think Podcast with Joel Settecase. I'm Joel Settecase, and this is the show that tackles impossible questions from a biblical perspective to help you explain, share, and defend the Christian message. Well, have you ever had an intense conversation with someone who held radically different beliefs than you did about life's big questions, about the universe, about everything? Most of us try to avoid those questions. Some of us would rather die than have those questions. But my guest today actually intentionally seeks them out. Justin Brierly is the Theology and Apologetics Editor for Premier Christianity. He's the host of the Unbelievable and Ask NT Wright Anything podcasts, as well as the program The Big Conversation. And he's the author of Unbelievable: Why, After Talking with Atheists for 10 years, I'm Still a Christian. For over 10 years, actually probably closer to 15 now, he can confirm this. For over 10 years, Justin has been facilitating discussions with the world's leading Christians and skeptical thinkers. I've been listening to his show since about 2013, and as someone who's been hosting interfaith discussions myself since about the same time, I've been greatly influenced by Justin's calm, patient demeanor, especially even when his guests tend to get very riled up, and Justin's neutral style. So today we're going to talk about how to host epic conversations between believers and non-believers, and why, after hearing all the arguments against Christianity, he is still a Christian. I've got a few other questions I want to ask him as well. So, Justin Brierly, welcome to the Think Podcast.
Thank you very much, Joel. I've been looking forward to our conversation. I was saying just before we came on air that you're a bit better dressed than I am, so I apologize. The lockdown is obviously a bit smarter for you than it is for me.
You know something? Here in America, we're just trying to play catch up to the level of classiness you all have. So
looks like you're way ahead to me. Looks like you're way ahead.
Not at all. So, well, thank you for joining me. You know, I mentioned this in the introduction, but I've been following your work and a big fan of what you're doing with Unbelievable and The Big Conversation for years now. As a matter of fact, I used to host this group called the Pub Forum, and we would meet in a bar and we would have intentional faith-based or philosophical conversations between Christians and non-Christians. And on my way over, on my drive, I would listen to Unbelievable just to sort of get it in my head. Hey, this is how you moderate a good conversation. And wow. So I've really, really appreciated your work. To everyone listening, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can leave a comment or a question. And if we have time at the end, Justin and I will try to address those at the end. So, so first of all, you and your wife, Lucy, you guys have 4 kids. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. 15, 12, 9, and 4 years old. So
wonderful.
Across the age range.
So you and I are both gluttons for punishment then. Because,
how many do you have, Joel?
We've got 4 as well.
Wow. There you go. Yeah. They keep us busy. To be honest, I'm kind of really glad of it during lockdown because the house is always full of, kids and laughter, and they kind of look after each other as well. So we've really seen the benefit of having, a few different people around during lockdown.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. As long as we can keep the excitement level, I think my kids are a little younger, but as long as we can keep the excitement level, below that threshold, below the tipping point.
I know what you mean.
And, I just finished your book, Unbelievable, the book. Just finished it actually early this morning. And, I found it compelling. I found it fascinating. And one of the things that I noticed is you became a Christian at about age 15. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. So that was sort of at a church youth camp, I guess you would call it. And I'd grown up going to church with my family. So it wasn't like I came from nothing, but I would say that's when it became alive for me. Sometimes people think you sort of inherit your faith from your parents and grandparents, but I don't believe that's true. I think every Christian has to own their faith for themselves. And yeah, there was a sort of fairly profound moment at that youth camp where things fell into place, the penny dropped, and And I would say I kind of measure my Christian walk from that moment onwards, really.
And in your book, you describe it as having a personal experience with God. How would you describe that personal experience for someone who's never experienced it?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say that my experience is sort of the de facto experience. I think God comes to people in different ways, in different situations and times. And but at that moment, for me, it was a point where I think I was ready to hear and ready to sort of put my life on a bit of a new level. Your mid to late teens is kind of when you're sorting through a lot of things, isn't it? And deciding in a way what direction you're going to go. And for me, I had an experience really where what I would describe in retrospect as the Holy Spirit really coming into my life in a way that sort of really turned me on to God, to scripture, to prayer, to really taking this Christian thing seriously and feeling like there was a genuine connection there with God. So that was quite a sort of a wham bam moment. As I say, I think it will be different for different people though. My wife Lucy, hers has always been a sort of more gentle, gradual sort of growing awareness of God really over the course of many years. And we're both at the same destination. We got there slightly different ways, but the important thing I think is that you arrive at the same destination in a way. So so that was my experience. But as I say, it is different for everyone, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I remember for myself at age 15, I became a Christian at a young age, 5 or so. But at 15, I definitely had a crisis of faith. And there seems to be something about those teenage years where you really wrestle with those big questions. And I think a lot of people.
I would say I had, it depends what you call a crisis of faith really, but I had a sort of crisis of faith once I got to university. And I started to be challenged by some of the folk there, and one particular person that sort of led me to question whether that experience really meant anything. And I think that was the point at which I discovered that actually it's important. It's great to have personal experiences of God that are very sort of, in a sense, emotional and tangible in that way. But equally, it's important that we invest in the foundational truths and evidence for Christianity as well. And so it was really during university and after that I started to engage in, what you and I are both engaged in a way, Christian apologetics and finding good, objective reasons for faith. And it's when I brought those two together that I felt actually there's a really firm foundation for Christianity and for faith. So yeah, probably it's very hard to sometimes divide up exactly what's going on in those teenage years, isn't it? But certainly there was a very profound experience, but also questions and doubts that came along, within a couple of years of that. But ultimately something where I was able to put the pieces together and continue to grow and my faith to take shape over the course of time.
So this was in university, and it was a skeptic, or was it an atheist who was raising these questions to you, or was this person affiliated with another religion?
This was just a skeptic, really, who I'd been friends with at the time, and it was a situation where they were just sort of basically, poking some holes in my faith. I mean, looking back on it now, I don't think the questions or the doubts they were raising now seem particularly difficult to deal with. But at the time, when I knew very little and was very unaware really of the whole area of Christian apologetics or the the range of evidence that exists, they seemed to me to be sort of difficult questions to answer. And I think that it kind of threw me a curveball. I would say it left me for a couple of weeks wondering, do I believe this stuff? Why do I believe this stuff? Was it just a figment of my imagination, as this person would have claimed it was? As I say, in a way, I'm very grateful for that experience, though, because I think it was part of what led me to begin to investigate for myself the sort of the rational basis for Christianity. And I'm not saying that's the only way to answer these kinds of questions. And many people get on in their life fine without having, having to explore a great deal these sorts of questions. But for many people, myself included, it is important to get to grips with the questions and the doubts and the rational evidences for faith. And so for me, in a way, I'm very grateful to that person who sort of sparked that journey, even though it was difficult at the time.
Well, how incredible is that the Lord used a skeptic in your college years to spark, to catalyze the journey that would eventually lead to you hosting, hundreds of conversations between Christians and atheists, and doing really starting an apologetics movement in a lot of ways, or at least hosting the conversation on the movement.
Yeah, no, and of course I would never have, at the time that incident occurred in my first year, I think it was end of my first year at university, I never dreamed of what might be in terms of the Unbelievable show and podcast and so on. That all came really several years later down the pipe, once I was finished university, married, had started my radio broadcasting career. The show itself really came a few years into my work at Premier Christian Radio, which is one of the only Christian radio stations in the UK. And that primarily was sparked by the fact that I felt we were doing a good job presenting Christians with Christian resources and getting them talking and thinking. And we had, worship music and teaching on the radio station. But I didn't feel like we had a space for actually hearing what those kinds of conversations look like when we are actually asked to make a defense of our faith with our friends and neighbors and colleagues and so on. So that was really what Unbelievable was aiming to do when we started it. 14 and a half years ago now, believe it or not. And just at one point on a Saturday afternoon when we could have those kinds of conversations. And that's where it all began, really.
So you've been doing this for almost 15 years. About 5 years ago, you decided it was time to write a book. What sparked that? Why write that after 10 years? Was there a particular conversation that you had that led to that? Or was it just, a decade is a good period of time to pause and think back on the last 10 years?
Yeah. So the book actually came about 3 years ago. And at the time I was writing it, I was about just over 10 years into the show. So I did give it this title, Unbelievable, Why After 10 Years of Talking with Atheists, I'm Still a Christian. I remember when I hosted the 10th anniversary sort of edition of the show, I kind of made it one of those Ask Me Anything type of shows. And one of the most frequent questions that came in, both from Christians and non-Christians who were listening, was, how come you're still a Christian after hearing all of these objections to faith, hosting all of these skeptics, world-renowned people? And so I thought, well, to really genuinely answer that would take a book, and that's eventually what I wrote, essentially. And it was a way, having very much been the neutral moderator on the show for many years, it was me laying down my cards on the table and explaining why I'm still a Christian, why I still believe Christianity makes best sense of the available data. And so it was an opportunity to talk about the show, introduce a lot of new people to the show, actually, as it turned out, and also to make the case for Christianity over the course of several chapters, drawing on lots of the stories and things and, conversations that we'd had on the show with people on both sides of the fence. So that was really where the book came from. And by doing that, in a way, I sort of, for the first time, launched my own sort of case for Christianity, and it led to me doing actually a lot more conversations, debates, where I was actually advocating for the Christian position rather than simply being the neutral moderator in the middle.
Right. So let's talk now about the process of hosting these epic conversations. What's the number one thing that you'd want our listeners to leave here with in terms of what do they need to understand about how to host, how to facilitate a really good conversation?
Well, there's a few key ingredients, I think. The first is that I think you have to have someone who knows how to conduct a conversation. I think having a moderator is really useful in any kind of conversation, because if it's someone who's experienced, they can move things along when they need to be moved along. Then they can ask questions sometimes if one side isn't really properly explaining their position. It's helpful. What I've always tried to be, essentially, is the listener. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the person who's watching or listening and thinking, what question are they asking right now? What is the thing that's maybe not being said here? Because when the two people dialoguing are in the middle of things, they've got their own agendas, they've got the things that they want to get across. But actually, we want to make sure that the listener is served throughout that. So I think having a good moderator in the middle of a discussion is always good. And of course, selecting the right guests. I've had some occasions when it just hasn't worked, frankly, because I've had two guests and they've kind of sailed past each other because they just haven't connected for whatever reason. So it's a bit of an art choosing the right two guests who are going to be well matched in terms of the way they bring themselves across. You don't want, a really highfalutin academic on one side and a very sort of armchair pundit on the other necessarily, because you're probably going to find it doesn't connect quite right. You want to make sure the guests work together. And of course, you want to find the hook into the conversation. You want to get into that discussion pretty quickly. You don't want to tiptoe around the edges of it too much. So there are a number of things I think that help to make, especially if it's being done for the public, a conversation that's interesting, engaging. You want a little bit of drama in there as well. Let's not forget. So, your choice of speakers, you're going to be looking for people who themselves are engaging and connect well. I've sometimes had those moments, sad to say, where I've had someone who's on paper looks great. Their writing is amazing. They've got a really great way of bringing things across, but you get them behind a microphone or on a camera and it's not the same because that's not in their skill set. So I'd say you always want to make sure you've spoken to or interacted with the people that you're going to bring on, just to make sure that they're comfortable and the right kind of person to be bringing on for that sort of a thing. So that would be just a few starters for 10, really.
All right. And why is this important to have these conversations? And then piggybacking on that, I know when you started Unbelievable and this sort of debate format, you did get some pushback, didn't you, from Christians who thought, well, why are you exposing Christians on a Christian radio station to the arguments against Christianity? So why is it important? And are you running a risk here of causing Christians to lose their faith?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when we did start this, it was just a radio program, not a podcast initially. And yeah, I did get pushback from Christians listening who were like, we've got plenty of atheists on the BBC. Do we need to have them on our Christian radio station as well? And my feeling was actually, well, frankly, the people who didn't like it just learned to skip that hour and a half on a Saturday afternoon. But actually, lots of people said they really enjoyed it and found it helpful, even though it was challenging, because actually they were surrounded by skeptics and atheists in their day-to-day life. And it was helpful to hear good conversations modeled well. And at least in this context, you're not simply hearing the atheist, though you will hear an atheist giving a cogent, argument against Christianity, but you'll also hopefully hear a Christian giving a good defense of Christianity as well. And I think it pays off in the long run to develop that kind of a willingness to listen to your opponent, a willingness to hear what a conversation could look like in that context. And you kind of develop a thick skin in the end. I think the problem is that many Christians, because they've never exposed themselves to this stuff, they have a knee-jerk response of fear when they hear something that potentially is an objection to their faith, and they run a mile. But we live in a world where you're only a Google click away from radical skepticism. And if you've kind of led a relatively insulated existence against online skepticism, then well done you, but your children won't and your grandchildren won't. You've got to be prepared for the fact that this stuff is there, and we might as well expose ourselves to it in a situation where at least we have a decent response on the other side. So I think it's time, in a way, I mean, this is putting it kind of harshly, but it's time for some Christians to grow up and realize that this is the world we live in. And if you're not ready with an answer, then you're going to find that really difficult. So I hope that for those who have eventually, that there's always a danger. Yeah, absolutely. We don't set this up so that the Christian wins hands down every time or anything like that. It's a genuine conversation. It'll depend on who's got the best of it on the day, and that's not always necessarily the Christian. Okay, but I think anyone who listens over a reasonable stretch of time to the Unbelievable show, they won't be able to go away saying Christianity is just a load of fairy tales and nonsense, because they're hearing intelligent people making a rational case for Christianity. Now, you may not ultimately be convinced, okay, but what you can't say is that there's absolutely nothing to this, and that's what I've experienced time and again. Some people who are atheists or skeptics have converted in part because of the show. Many haven't, but they do have nonetheless a new respect for Christianity, because we're willing to entertain these conversations, and they've actually realized there are intelligent Christians out there with points of view that are worth hearing.
Now, just to play devil's advocate, couldn't the same be said for the flip side of the issue? Is this potentially showing Christians that there is something to atheism, that, that maybe there's more than just a simple bare denial of God's existence or something like that? Could you make that point as well, or could someone make that point?
Of course. And in a way, again, I don't see that there's a problem with that. As Christians, we're interested in truth, and if the truth is that not all atheists are simply nihilistic God deniers, then maybe that's worth finding out and exploring. And in fact, you might find out that there are some very nice atheists out there, as I have. Indeed, the vast majority of atheists I speak to are very nice people. So I think actually there's a huge danger when we never actually do talk to each other, that we essentially just build caricatures of each other. And that happens on the Christian or atheist side. And so actually sitting down, having those kinds of face-to-face conversations really does help to flesh out the person that you're addressing, stops them being just an idea or an ideology, and makes them into a person. And that makes actually, I think, in the long run, again, for way more fruitful conversations. And yeah, you run the risk that you will be changed. You are not a conversation. Joel?
Justin, are you there? Can you hear me? Okay, I think we've lost the connection. If you look on my screen right now, Justin is frozen. Could be a bad connection. We are connecting from all the way. Okay, there. Looks like you're back. Oh, okay, Justin, can you hear me? Well, he did say that drama is a crucial ingredient into a good conversation. So we're getting some electronic technology drama right now. And so that must mean this is a great conversation. Justin, can you still hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, sorry, we lost connection for a moment there. That may be at my end, for which I apologize, Joel.
It very well could be at my end. I mean, if you think about it, we're connected by cables running underneath the Atlantic Ocean right now. Maybe a shark bit one of the lines or something. It's just amazing what we can do through technology. But
it is, but it doesn't always. Yes, we're connected again. So on where we left off.
Perfect. So you mentioned in your book on page 175, 176, you seem to indicate that new atheism, the movement with which we associate figures like Dawkins and Dennett, Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens, it's actually a diminishing movement. You talk about the rise of atheism 2.0, which is still very much untested, still very nebulous as to what could become of that. You mentioned that I believe it was Pew Research that showed by 2020, but by this year, the global population of atheists was projected to decrease to 1.8%. So how important is it right now for us to still be dealing with atheism and agnosticism and anti-theism? How important is that globally? How important is that in the English-speaking world? And I'm curious, what do you think is next? Or will it be atheism for quite some time?
Well, obviously, the new atheism hasn't gone away per se, and I think it's important to recognize that there's still plenty of that Dawkins-style atheism awash, especially in the recesses of the internet, and so in a way that there's. Do you think the conversation though in the public sphere has moved on?
Well, on my end, it looks like we've lost connection again. Could be something with the local internet here. Obviously, with lockdown, everybody is quarantined, everybody's at home. But we're going to try and see if we can get the connection back up and running. And, I'm speaking today with Justin Brierly, who is the host of the Unbelievable podcast, and radio show. And if you're just now joining us, what we've talked about so far is that these conversations are vital to have nowadays because of the situation in which we find ourselves. Obviously, unless you've been living under a rock for the last, for your whole life, you've seen that not everyone out there is a Christian. In fact, we're surrounded by people who believe differently, who not only have differing beliefs, but also have no belief at all. And it's so important for us to be able to interact with our neighbors in a neighborly way. So Justin he seems to have lost connection. We're going to hope to get him back. But Lynn DeRusha, my friend Lynn, has asked the question, please define new atheism. That's a great question. I guess we should define those terms while we're waiting for Justin to return. So the new atheism, oh, good. Okay. It looks like Justin is back. I'm going to add him back to the stream. And okay, Justin, welcome back.
I'm so sorry, Joel. This may be the fact my kids are on Netflix or something in the background, but we don't have a very strong Wi-Fi in our house, so
No
my
worries at
apologies.
all.
But yeah, we're back together now, aren't we?
Well, yes, we are. And while you were gone, we did get the question, could you please define new atheism? Could we just take a minute, just very briefly, and define, just for people who are playing catch up with that term?
Sure. Well, the new atheism really is a sort of more dogmatic form of atheism that especially developed in the sort of late 2000s, and around 2010 probably was the zenith of new atheism. And a typical example is Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, which was a best-selling, book, along with others like God Is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens and others. And so it was this more public, dogmatic form of critique of religion. I think, to be honest, probably what sparked it was the 9/11 attacks.
Oops, it looks like, and well, we're having all kinds of fun because I was just talking and it turns out I was on mute. So so between the two of us, it's amazing that we both we do this for a living. This is our job.
Would you believe it? Yeah. Yeah.
So after 9/11, the new atheism as a movement sort of began to take off. Was that in response? Was that sort of as a criticism of just theism in general in light of these attacks that were done in the name of Allah? Or was it more of a problem of evil kind of issue that reared its ugly head? How could God allow something like this to happen? Or was it just sort of a nihilistic lurching on the part of the culture? Nothing has any meaning. Look what's happening.
I think what I see is, having been at the bottom of it, was a kind of a general view. It was a slightly unhelpful view, but that somehow religion is generally responsible for the evils in the world. And so obviously that particular example of, fundamentalist Islam was the the particular issue at stake there, but it somehow all religions got painted with the same brush in that moment, and it led to this, this kind of view, especially espoused by people like Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, that faith is always bad, superstition is always bad compared to the truth of science, and so on. In a funny way, though, it simply replaced one form of dogmatism with another, which was this kind of faith, in a way, in progress and science, and that without religion, the world will be a better place, of which there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that is going to be the outcome of getting rid of religion. And in fact, it wasn't hard to see that new atheist movement itself quickly sort of swallowed itself in various ways, because as soon as you try to organize around something, you quickly discover the problems that exist. So there were all kinds of fallouts between some of the leading characters in this movement. There were disputes and controversies about speakers and things they had done at conferences, and people who wanted to take the movement in one direction and others in another direction. So in an ironic way, it experienced just as many splits as the average religion does in the course of the next several years. And that's why I say I think the conversation's moved on a bit since that, because I think people realized, well, you may be trying to tear down religion with this new atheist thing, but what are you going to replace it with? People still need some structure, some meaning, some kind of narrative to live their life by. We don't simply exist in a vacuum. And despite the best efforts of some of these characters to sell science or whatever as the thing we should be basing our lives on, people I think quickly realized that's just science is just a neutral thing. You can use it for good or for evil, but how do we work out what is the right way of living? How do we work out what is the wrong way of living? And for that, you ultimately come back to something that goes beyond nature. You have to go to the supernatural. You have to go to something transcendent. And so that's, I think, where the conversation's been turning again, with interesting characters in recent years like Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray and Brett Weinstein and others, this so-called intellectual dark web, these sort of slightly out of the box thinkers, politically incorrect folk who are asking interesting questions again. So I featured a number of them on my show over the last few years. People who, as it turned out, even though they're secular, are sort of acknowledging the value of religion and realizing that maybe we're a bit too quick to throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you like, and taking a different view on these things to the Hitchens and the Dawkins and Harris. Looks like we dropped out again briefly there,
a little bit,
Joel, but carry on.
Yes. So I've been interacting with Jordan Peterson's thought a little bit. My brother and I have a sort of a sub podcast. My brother's a bit of a philosopher in his own right, seminary student. And so we host a podcast called Sons of Thunder. And this is where we get into a lot of those ideas of the intellectual dark web and Jordan Peterson. And so I've been reading Peterson, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but to interact with his thought and to hear the way he talks about religion and about even Christianity, you just want to just take him and say, just grab him by the shoulders and, Dr. Peterson, please, you're right there. You're right there. Go.
You're on the edge. Yeah.
Go in. You can see it. It's just a matter of time. How do you know, Justin, how do you know when you've hosted a really good conversation? Is it something that you can feel in the moment? Do you have to wait till afterwards when you see the response of your listeners? How do you know when you've met your goal of having a very good conversation?
Yeah, I think you can tell in the moment. If I'm enjoying it, I know the average listener is probably enjoying it as well. And that can be a very different mixture of things, but usually it's going to be two people who have had quite a sparky, engaging discussion, where there wasn't too passive, but it wasn't too aggressive either. Where you feel like you've learned something along the way. I always enjoy shows where I come out feeling like actually that wasn't just entertaining to watch, but I feel like I've actually learned a few things as well. And generally speaking, both parties tend to be civil and shake hands at the end, even if they've disagreed strongly in the course of a discussion. I mean, one that I'm thinking of where I knew once that conversation was recorded that it was absolute gold was one we did for our big conversation series last year, where Tom Holland and AC Grayling got together to debate the kind of the history of Christianity in some ways, or whether Christianity gave us our values in the.
Yes. So I lost you for a second there, but I listened to that episode and really, really enjoyed it. And I believe that was the first time I've heard an expression that you used to describe it, which I really want to find a way to work into my own conversations, which is barnstormer. I think you described it as a real barnstormer of a conversation. Justin, it looks like you are. I'm getting a little swirly.
Are we back?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Okay. I heard you say, "Are we back?" There's nothing on the screen. You might need to restart your camera again. This could just be the joy of using this particular program, StreamWeb. Okay, I can see you.
I apologize. I suspect it might be my Wi-Fi or something is behaving particularly badly this afternoon, for which but I'm enjoying the moments when we are online together.
Me too.
Shall I pick it up again?
Sure. Yes, please.
Shall I pick it up again from Tom Holland?
Yes, please. Yes.
And AC Grayling. Okay.
Yes,
I hope it's coming through. Okay. So they joined me to debate the Christianity is.
All right. Well, the internet does. Okay.
That's incredible.
Justin, sorry. Seems like we still have got a spotty connection. Looks like we are still having some connectivity problems. Let's just take a minute here, and I'll just let you know if you want to share your feedback about this episode. We'd love for you to get in touch. And one of the things that Justin will typically do on the Unbelievable podcast is he will share feedback that folks write in, and he'll share that on the latter part of the show. Okay, I can see you. It looks like, you know what? If we were both a bit more charismatic, we might want to, cast out the demon of internet connectivity here. But yep. Okay. Lost you again.
We're not having much luck here, are we?
We are not. I was just saying it.
Yeah. Sorry. I think we've got to.
We might. Maybe we should. Maybe we should begin to bring it to a close anyway. I think we've hit a few points. I think that were really good. In having this conversation, I was being a little selfish anyway, because I host conversations like this and I want to know how to do a better job. So could you, Justin, maybe if you could just let us know for those who want to have this kind of conversation, and maybe not on a podcast or a radio show, just in their everyday life, what are just a couple of pointers on how to seek them out, how to maintain a positive Christ-like attitude, even while not abandoning our foundation of Christian belief? And, what should be the goal of one of these conversations? And then after this, we'll go ahead, we'll begin to bring the podcast to a close, if that's all right.
Sure. Well, I'd say in our everyday life, it very much depends on the circles you move in as to whether you're going to bump into people who want to have these kinds of conversations. I think it's important that, when Christians, look at that classic verse, 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you about the reason for the hope that you have. There's an expectation there that people are going to be asking. And if you have surrounded yourself in a Christian bubble where no one ever really asks you about your Christian faith, you've got to ask yourself, well, maybe I need to get out of my bubble and lead a life that provokes questions. So I think we need to be doing that in our everyday life, not kind of be going out to bash people around the head with the Bible or anything like that, but be open and find the opportunity.
All right. Well, it does look like we've lost connection one more time. Here's an interesting fact that I discovered when I was reading Justin's book, which I highly recommend. I finished it. Now I listened to part of it on audio on Audible, and then I read part of it on my Kindle. But I did find the book very engaging. And an interesting fact about Justin's own work is I'm not sure the exact title that he had, but he was managing the promotion for some events that William Lane Craig, who's a Christian apologist, was doing around London. And Richard Dawkins, who's a notorious atheist, we mentioned him earlier, had sort of promoted these, had been promoting atheism with this this series of bus ads that said, "There's probably no God, so relax and enjoy your life." And Justin was behind. Justin, I'm just telling this story from your book about how you had your bus sign campaign promoting William Lane Craig's talks, which said, so Dawkins. The signs that he had been promoting said, "There's probably no God, so just relax and enjoy your life," something to that effect. And the signs that your group put up said, "There's probably no Dawkins, so relax and enjoy." And then you had the date of the events, which I thought was just absolutely hilarious when I saw that, and I had no idea that you were the one kind of behind that.
No, it was great fun, actually. This was back in 2011, believe it or not, and wow. I was part of a small committee helping to organize a tour of the UK for William Lane Craig. And yes, it was just a sort of the year after there had been this bus campaign in London, which you mentioned, and so we a rather tongue-in-cheek bus campaign in Oxford was launched because we'd invited Richard Dawkins, who would, put his cards on the table with the God delusion and well known as an atheist and critic of Christianity. And we said, well, look, why don't you step up and debate one of the leading proponents of Christianity in the world? And he consistently refused to do that. He gave a number of various different reasons why he refused to. So we eventually did launch this bus campaign. So there were these buses running around Oxford saying, "There's probably no Dawkins, but turn up at the Sheldonian Theatre and find out." So that was fun. I think there is a place for Christians to be a little bit cheeky and get their message out in that sort of way. And it did provoke quite a lot of interest in news articles and so on. So yeah, that was a fun one.
Very cool. Well, as we sort of bring this to a close, in this rare moment of just perfect connectivity here, where both of our internets are working, what would be just one piece of advice you'd want to leave? What's one piece of advice you could give me as a newer podcaster, someone who's new to the game? What's something that I can be doing to ensure that I'm hosting good conversations? One piece of advice that you could leave me with. Okay, it looks like we've lost connectivity one last time here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this to a close, and I'm going to send Justin a message here. Maybe it's the platform that we're using. It very well could be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to connect with Justin via some other means, whether a Facebook video chat or Google Hangouts or something like that. Lord willing, this won't be the last time the two of us get to have a conversation. I want to thank everyone for watching, and I do apologize for the spottiness of the internet connection, but this is life. This is how things go sometimes in the internet age. And as the majority of us are on lockdown around the world right now, This is just a reality of life where we are trying to connect digitally, and then therefore we have to deal with the pitfalls and the uncertainties of these digital connections. So hopefully you heard something today that was helpful. And I know I did. I really like what Justin had to say about how he facilitates the conversations and tries to match up guests that are going to be at odds with each other, perhaps, but not too fiery, but just fiery enough. And as a younger podcaster in the game right now, although I don't look very young with this mustache, my Corona stash, but I'm very interested in learning how to have these great conversations. Maybe you are too. And if that's the case, then I hope that you've gotten something that you can put into practice. I know some of you are having conversations like this. Others of you have been looking for opportunities to have these kind of conversations. And I hope that you've heard something today from Justin that you'll be able to put into action. One of the great things about interviewing someone like Justin Brierly, and I'll say this, he and I don't agree on every point of theology, on every point of ecclesiology, having to do, the theology of the church. But when you get to talk with somebody like this, who's been in the game for years, who has hosted hundreds of these excellent conversations, you have to listen and you have to be willing to learn. And so I hope that you have found something that you've been able to learn, something you've been able to sort of put in your back pocket. I know I have. Justin's a guy that I very much look up to in terms of his skill and knowledge in this area of hosting epic conversations. And I hope that this has been helpful. And you know what? This is not goodbye. This has just been a little pit stop along the road of your spiritual journey. And if you would like to get in touch with Justin, you can go ahead and do that. Simply, you can connect with him on Twitter. His handle on Twitter is @unbelievablejb. Also, you might want to do what I did, which was to join the Facebook group, the Unbelievable Facebook group, which I will say, you want to talk about some barnstormers of conversations. There are some excellent discussions and conversations that go on in that Facebook group. And if you're a believer who's just getting into the realm of apologetics, might I suggest that you join that group and really begin to wet your whistle, to whet your appetite and dip your toe in the water in terms of having these conversations, because there are plenty of skeptics and unbelievers who are in that group who are itching for a conversation with a Christian. You don't have to have all the answers, but being willing to start the conversation oftentimes is a first step that the Lord will greatly bless and benefit. Even think about Justin's own story, where he was in university, he was in college, and he was willing to have that conversation with a skeptic that ended up leading him on a path that led to the Unbelievable podcast and the other shows that he does and the book that he wrote. So you never know where the conversation will lead you. So connect with the Think Institute simply by going to thethink.institute. Connect with us on social media. On Facebook and Instagram, we are at The Think Institute. On Twitter, it's at ThinkInst, INST. And let me encourage you, if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the Think podcast. We are on all the platforms. We're just recently uploaded. We're just recently now on Spotify, as well as Stitcher, of course, Apple Podcasts, all the platforms. And if you haven't done so yet, if you've been listening for a while, you like the content, please leave us an honest 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I can't tell you how much I appreciate when you do that. It helps to commend others, not only to our podcast, but also to the other great podcasters who are out there doing similar work, better work, different work, but who nevertheless are trying to host the conversation on life and faith and getting the gospel of Jesus Christ out there. So thank you for listening. And that's all I have for you today. Justin, I want to thank my guest, Justin Brierly, for joining me and having this excellent conversation. I do apologize for the internet connectivity issues. And until next time, I hope it made you think.